There's a lot of chatter about the United States economy, the Federal Reserve Bank, our deficit spending. Steve Bonta is with the John Birch Society, and he is the publisher of the New American Magazine. Uh, Talking, and he considers himself, and is justified so, in being an expert on our economy, the Fed, and monetary policy. Steve, welcome to The Truth.
Hey, great to be here.
Yes, sir. So you start out with the premise that our currency used to be simply gold and silver. It worked pretty good, didn't it? Well, what's the issue here?
Well, I mean, up until the 1930s, and maybe more technically until 1971, we had a gold standard, and before that, what was called a bimetallic standard, which was actually included in the Constitution, which makes explicit that no state shall make anything but gold or silver legal tender, and all that type of thing. So that was the system that we began with, and in the early 20th century, starting in Europe, countries began to leave the gold standard, much less the silver standard, and switched over to what's called fiat money, which is essentially money that's simply created by bankers and legislative fiat. Printed money, as we like to say. Although nowadays, of course, a lot of the majority of it's not physically printed, but just created by computer entry. But that's fiat money. It's money that's not backed by any asset, gold or silver. The United States followed originally, the countries in Europe, which had been completely bankrupted by World War I, were the first to go off the gold standard. They didn't really have a silver standard in the sense that we did. And the United States followed suit under Roosevelt, FDR, that Roosevelt, in the 1930s, at the beginning of the Depression. One of the first things Roosevelt did when he became president was to end the gold standard for all but foreign holders of American dollar-denominated assets, primarily treasury debt, that type of thing, treasury bonds, treasury bills, and so forth and so on. And for American citizens, it was made illegal for them to own any kind of gold coinage, and gold was forcibly confiscated. Silver remained in circulation until the mid-1960s. I believe 1965 was the last year that silver coins were minted. And then pursuant the Bretton Woods Agreement, which took place in 1944 near the end of World War II, it was agreed by the nations of the world, absent a couple that were on the other side of the conflict, but all the other nations agreed, in effect, to make the U.S. dollar the international standard, the reserve currency of the world, as we like to say, so that all major transactions, trade, buying and selling of petroleum and other commodities, and everything else was always denominated in dollars. And the United States would maintain its tether to gold for any foreigners who wish to redeem dollars. Okay, so that was called the gold window. And when Nixon became president, he found that the U.S. Finances were in shambles because of the Vietnam War in particular was just drawing down reserves. And so in 1971, he said, in effect, that whole promise we made to have gold convertible, dollars convertible to gold, no, we're reneging on that. And so that's euphemistically called closing the gold window, but it's actually a form of default. So when people say, well, the United States has never defaulted on our debts, we're not like Argentina or Zimbabwe. Actually, we have, because we said, in effect, we're no longer going to pay you in gold as we promised to do from now on. You just got to accept dollars.
And even beyond that, we have, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally created mass inflation, not just recently, but also in the 70s. And so we paid back our creditors with deflated dollars. I mean, we borrowed $1 and we repay it with 90 cents or less because of the devalued and loss of purchasing part value of the dollar.
Well, yes, and I mean the entire world is all world currencies now, even the Swiss franc that was the last one to go off the gold standard, but they're all fiat. And so, in effect, the strength of the dollar today, the reason that people still regard the dollar as the bedrock currency, the reserve currency, the one that people are willing and that foreigners are still willing to buy U.S. Government debt, is that the U.S. dollar is less inflationary than the other currencies. in effect. That it's the least objectionable of all of them. But in effect, the entire world has been persuaded to go onto the system of fiat currency. And in some cases, it's been absolutely disastrous. Obviously, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Russia, Turkey, many other countries have suffered from what's called hyperinflation. But fiat currency, fiat money is inherently inflationary. So when people talk about how, oh, inflation is heating up, what they neglect to say is that there's always inflation going on when money is being printed. And the reason is that fiat money is effectively politicized money. So for all that you hear about how the Federal Reserve is supposedly above the fray and is non-political and all this type of thing, that's manifestly not the case. The Federal Reserve, like all central banks, is beholden to politicians. It has to work with treasury officials in the government and so forth. And so it is obviously when it adjusts its rates, it never does so in a way that is that damages the people who matter. And what I mean by that is that the Federal Reserve, like all central banks, they don't just print money and throw it out of helicopters. They actually have a very sophisticated mechanism for introducing, well, several actually, for introducing new money into the money supply. And one of the most important of these is what's called open market operations. Okay, and open market operations were invented by a man named Benjamin Strong, who was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and was probably involved in the secret Jekyll Island meeting in the early 20th century, where the Federal Reserve was first planned out with a bunch of elite European bankers.
Weren't U.S. businessmen involved in that too, like the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers? And
Oh yeah, there were, yeah, certainly there were, yeah. So I mean, there were several U.S. businessmen and one U.S. congressman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, were all involved in this sort of cabal that met at the Jekyll Island and in secret and
yes,
planned the creation of the Federal Reserve. That's another story for another day. But suffice it to say, this Benjamin Strong was one of the central figures, and he was a brilliant financier. And one of the problems he has is, well, okay, so now we have this mechanism, this which we've wanted, the bankers have always wanted, this way of creating money ex nihilo, as it were. But if we do something so crass as to throw bales of money out of helicopters, they didn't have helicopters back then, throw bales out of hay wagons along the street, or deliver money like the milkman delivering milk, well, people will cotton on to what's going on, and you have rampant inflation. So you need to have some sort of mechanism that's subtle enough that people won't understand what's happening. So open market operations are whereby the central bank, the Federal Reserve in this case, purchases government debt on the market. In other words, debt that's already been issued and bought by somebody else. Someone wants to sell it. The Federal Reserve steps in and buys it, and they pay for it simply by creating new money. Okay, and they do this at regularly scheduled meetings when they conduct these operations. But the critical point here is that they do it in concert with a very small number of privileged financial institutions. In the United States, every one of those is in or is in the New York City area. Okay. And there's a number of them abroad in Europe and Japan and elsewhere overseas that do the same thing. And these are authorized dealers who are allowed to transact treasuries, both on behalf of the Treasury Department and on behalf of the Federal Reserve. And so the plangent point here is that these elite money-centered banks and commercial and investment banks that are given this authority to transact, they have first dibs on the new money. They're the ones who are going to receive the deposit when the Federal Reserve says, okay, we're going to pay you for X amount of treasuries that are being sold. The money goes to them. And so anyone who has an account with them, and those are mostly wealthy people, hedge fund managers and people like this, they get first dibs on the new money. And it works out really well for them because it inflates the value of their assets. It's one of the reasons that the stock market is constantly going up and up and up in defiance of all logic, and the PE is good. The collective PE is getting greater and greater with the passage of years. Is because the effects of inflation on assets are great if you own the assets, right? But for ordinary people like us, of course, that money starts at these the money spigots are at these money center banks that operate directly with the Fed. But then eventually it percolates out into the rest of the economy. and drives up consumer prices. And you have consumer inflation, which is not good for the rest of us who rely on savings and CDs and ordinary things like this. We see the prices of grocery go up and cars and fuel and everything else, right? But if you're a billionaire and you have an account at one of these banks, you're going to see your portfolio just surge every time there's a new round of quantitative easing or whatever it happens to be, right? So the thing is, inflation is beneficial to the few at the expense of the many. And it's the real reason that, the rich are getting richer and fewer in number, and the poor are getting, maybe not poorer, but people in the middle class are being ground down. I mean, we're still not Burkina Faso or something like that. But the fact is that 60, 70 years ago, a one-income family could afford a decent house, a car, pay off the mortgage by the time the couple was 40 years old or thereabouts, live the rest of their lives in debt, accumulate savings and this type of thing. Today, a two-income household is hard-pressed to do those things. Many ordinary two-income middle-class households never pay their house off. Never pay their student loans, are forever making payments on cars. And you see that indebtedness is growing and growing and growing. And this is the long-term consequence of fiat money and inflationary currency as far as ordinary people are concerned. But for the ultra rich, it's a great thing.
So there's a lot of skepticism on the part of many people about the Federal Reserve. I've always sort of been of the mindset that we need them, that they represent a healthy check and balance on an out of control Congress that is spending money like drunken sailors on Friday night with no regard to the long-term consequences of their recklessness, and that the Fed is at least able to maintain some stability and tame inflation, loosen and constrict credit based on employment and inflation and other monetary indicators. But I just don't know. The fact that it was created in secrecy, the fact that they operate independent of everyone, the only real check is that Trump thinks he can fire the head of the Federal Reserve. I'm not convinced that he can even fire him. Where do the checks and balances come into play? And are we being played on both sides against the middle here?
Well, I mean, I have to be careful here. I mean, bankers have a certain way of looking at their profession, what they do, and they tend to think of themselves as benefactors. And the more independence they have, the better they can discharge their duties. That's what they say. So there's this idea that's encouraged, and not just with regard to the Federal Reserve, by the way. This applies to the entire so-called fourth branch of government, all these regulatory agencies that are nominally nestled inside the executive branch, but we're told, they're independent. That this idea that it's somehow it's sullying and it's an impure thing if you are beholden to the messiness of politics. Now, the reality of the Federal Reserve with regard to Congress and debt is this. Far from providing a check on Congress, what the Federal Reserve does is it incentivizes reckless spending and debt. Because here's the nasty little secret of the Federal Reserve that almost no one understands. And that is, people will come out and say, well, the Federal Reserve creates money out of nothing. And technically that's not true. They create money out of debt. Okay, open market operations being exhibit A, right? In other words, if you don't have the government issuing debt, they have nothing to purchase to add to their portfolio for the which they can then, create fiat money in exchange. Okay, because they're not just creating dollars and saying, here's money. They're saying we're creating it in exchange for debt. The other way that they do it, by the way, is that they allow the commercial banking system to lower its interest rates or to lower their required reserve rates, and that in turn incentivizes them to loan out more money, and more people come in and borrow money. So in both cases, an increase in the money supply is always accompanied by an increase in debt, public and private, right? And so what does that mean? It means that all of our Congress critters know that they really don't have to worry about debt because we can always print our way out of it. And they also know that the monetary system itself cannot function without government debt. That's the ultimate dirty secret of fiat money. Is if our government paid off all of its debts, if there was no longer any out, like it did very briefly during Andrew Jackson's presidency, and has never done so since. If we return to that state of affairs of total national solvency, if we were in the blue, we would no longer have any money in circulation because there'd be no way for the Federal Reserve to inject liquidity, as the expression goes. There'd be no debt to offset that. And this was actually explained at least once, to our knowledge, to Congress, a rather incredulous congressional committee back in the 1930s by Mariner Eccles, the first truly powerful Fed chair. And he told the congressman, he said, if Americans got out of debt, if the whole country, the government, and people, if people basically paid off all their debts, the system we have now could not function. All the money would disappear back in the bank vaults, and it wouldn't be able to circulate. So the entire system depends upon debt.
That's a hard principle for me to get my mind around. I mean, yes, the debt would be extinguished, but you've still got commerce. You've got
That's right.
a $4 trillion a year economy.
Well, we'd have to have another mechanism for money if we said, in effect, we're going to actually start getting. I mean, it would actually be a problem even if we began seriously paying down the debt, because the whole cycle has become dependent on the idea that we not only have debt but more and more of it.
I'm playing devil's advocate with
Sure.
you, but I have actually maintained the same theory. I want to come back to that in a second, but before we jump to that, the fact of the matter is that that piece of paper that we use, that's currency, that we keep score with, and it shows up in our bank account, is valuable because it is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of American government. So I don't really understand why getting rid of $37 trillion in debt would result in our economy imploding. And because your theory is that there would be no debt, there'd be no money. That does not really resonate with me, but I don't say that contentiously. Just educate me.
No. I'm not saying the economy would implode. I'm saying that if we decided at some point, and right now politically that looks very unlikely, but if we actually if we elected 435 Thomas Masseys to Congress or something like this, and suddenly the political will was there to actually cut government spending and to cut debt in a major way, which we could do. I mean, if we simply got rid of all the extra, the non-constitutional functions of the federal government, it would probably reduce, federal expenditures by 70% or more just by doing that, just by cutting expenses. But leaving that aside, it's not likely to happen anytime soon. But supposing that it were, in order to avoid, utter chaos and crashing the system, we would have to concomitantly change the monetary system, which is dependent on ever increasing supply of debt, because otherwise, again, you're going to quickly run out of debt with which to conduct open market operations. So then how do you create more money then?
Well, you have piqued my interest. I'm not there yet, but I am open to receiving more education and getting more knowledgeable on what you're espousing. It would seem to me, well, I'm conflicted on it. Okay, because I feel that, and I made the point many times on this program. If you, anytime we get in a financial crisis, what's the first thing we do?
Well, we print more money.
Exactly. We print more money because, and we create more debt, and we call it
Create more debt. I don't know.
stimulus.
Oh, a stimulus. Right. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we get in trouble, the first knee jerk reaction, 2008, what did we do? We just started printing money like it was going out of style. And to the government's credit, we saved our economy. I mean, was it the Treasury Secretary? I think it was the Treasury Secretary, or maybe the Federal Reserve Chairman. He literally lived in his office for a week and really didn't sleep, trying to keep our government alive and our country financially viable. But the term is that we're stimulating the economy so that it can survive, so we can band-aid it over until we can get our financial house back in order. So I've asked many people, including a very knowledgeable guy from the Mises Institute. Their whole thrust is a think tank on uh, monetary and fiscal policy in the U.S. economy. And I said, if you consider printing money stimulus, if you start paying back the debt, wouldn't that be the opposite of stimulus and therefore be a destimulus and perhaps actually cause us to enter into at least an economic slowdown, if not an all out recession? So I get where you're coming from. The problem that I have is that our national debt at the level that it's at has now created a new line item on our federal budget called interest, which is now the single largest line item on our federal budget. It now exceeds the GDP of the United States, the debt does. And I had breakfast with the president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve. Uh, I think well, I can tell you it was in 2018, so 7 years ago. And he told me that the debt to GDP was 70%, and that when it got to 75 or 80%, it was considered the tipping point. And now I think we're at 115%.
At least 120, yeah, depending on whom you talk to. Yeah.
Or maybe 120. So, I mean, it's changing daily. And so it feels to me that we're headed for a financial doomsday scenario. Now, I think the argument against it is, in support of your point, I think President Trump is remaking our economy one brick at a time. And I think he's almost there. He's passed a big, beautiful bill providing tax cuts, more debt. He has declared tariffs on our friends and foes alike. That's creating $650 billion of newfound revenue coming in, flooding into our treasury. He is deregulating our government. He finally got Jerome Powell to cut interest rates, and I think we're due for another one or two. And he's gotten $15 trillion. Now, that's real money, partner, of new investment in our country for manufacturing. That is going to extinguish the unemployment condition that we have at 4.3%, which I think is high. Some people say they think it's equivalent to full employment. I don't buy that because we had 3.2% under Trump 1.0. So I think we got a lot of room for improvement on unemployment. But my point is, we get those things done, then give us meaningful tax or budget relief and get this federal budget under control. And I know I'm going on a bit of a soapbox rant here. Can I give you one more thing that I'm looking at in the future that I think could be incredibly, I mean, like the most significant thing that's happened since 1964? I don't mean to monopolize our conversation, but I'm on a tear. The Supreme Court of the United States right now has a case on their docket to review the Voting Rights Act of 1964. The Voting Rights Act of 1964, I think, appropriately changed the balance of power in the United States and gave a voice to minorities who had been denied and discriminated against. Perfect policy, right time, right place, right decision. Roll the camera forward 60 years later. Those same minorities have had to vote. They've had a disproportionate say in our national policy. Like it or not, it's a fact. Look at New England, 40% Republican, 0 representatives in Congress. Look at California, 40% Republican, 17% Republican representation in Congress. And they have gotten free food, free housing, free education, just Obama phones. And I think the party's over. And I think we've had the tail wagging the dog too long. They don't the minorities that I'm speaking about, you name them, principally African Americans, Hispanics to some extent, and maybe Asians. A smattering of Asians would be in that group. But the tail has wagged the dog. It has been really a policy of giving of tension between the haves and the have-nots, and the haves have given and given and given and given. And now I think they are tired of giving because now blacks want reparations, and we're saying we've already paid. Number one. Number two, we didn't create slavery. We didn't enjoy any benefit from slavery. That happened hundreds over centuries ago, a century ago at least, although discrimination continued. And it is my prediction that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to reverse the Voting Rights Act of 1964, and we're going to restore a balance of power in the United States. And then we're not going to have a Congress of masses, but we're going to have more of them. And we can get some adults back in the room, and we can stop this absurd, destructive government spending.
Well, I think we'll know a lot more about this come next November, a year from November. We'll see how the midterm elections go and what the general sentiment. I mean, it certainly looks to me, and a lot of people are saying, this is just we're going through a period of change comparable to the post-war period, the Gilded Age, the early Republic after the country became independent. It's kind of, that's what we're seeing right now, is a transition into an entirely new way, or perhaps, in some ways, a restoration of the old cadences of the way things used to be done. I mean, I think just in general, where all government policy is concerned, whether you're talking about monetary policy we were discussing earlier and so forth, you always have to look at who is being incentivized to do what. And so often you see, as with the Voting Rights Act and so many other things that one could adduce, we see legislation being passed, agencies being created, where at least professedly the best of intentions are involved. We want to equalize, level the playing field, or we want to end discrimination. We want to give the downtrodden more opportunity, and so forth and so on. I mean, that was kind of the clarion call of the entire New Deal, for example, and many other things. And we don't stop to think of, first of all, what the long-term effects of these programs would be. We only think in terms of the short term and in terms of the specific groups perhaps being targeted, the interest groups or the minorities or what have you. We don't think about how it affects the generality in the long term. And by effects, I mean, we don't always think through what the incentives are. So it may sound nice, for example, to say, well, let's be generous with the public monies and give them to people who are poor. Create welfare programs, what used to be called the dole, but that was a term that FDR got rid of because it sounded very pejorative in people's minds. But welfarism generally disincentivizes industry and thrift on a personal level. That's a fact. And so, we now see, and the same is, when we have new, immigrants coming into the country legally or illegally or whatever, we want to offer them more benefits. We want to be kind. Well, what does that do? Well, it incentivizes more illegal immigration, as we've seen in recent years. And so often, this is the problem with policymakers, is if they think in the short term, they think in terms of, we want to be good people now. We want to do things that'll benefit. Some of them may be more cynical. They may think, well, I want to preserve my power base and all this sort of thing. But I think a lot of people, give them the benefit of the doubt, in DC, including many liberals, are well-intentioned. Ultimately, they want to do the nice and decent thing, but they don't think about, how's this going to play with human nature? It's what we know about human nature. And so, and I kind of, circle back to what we were saying earlier. I mean, that's the problem with having a fiat currency, that somebody has the power to it. It inevitably incentivizes this kind of abuse, and it incentivizes more and more debt beyond what would be rational.
Well, I think you're a nice guy. I think you're a smart guy. I note that you did not touch any of those hot potatoes that I threw out at you, and I don't really blame you for that. I would just say two things. One is, I think that the die is going to be cast in January when the Supreme Court rules on the Voting Rights Act. We have already seen districts being redrawn in North Carolina where Republicans picked up one seat. Now the Democrats are really freaking out because they realize that Florida's on the verge of doing that, as are some other states. And I think that the Voting Rights Act, if it is shot down, it will return us truly to one man, one vote. And if you don't believe in white supremacy, which we're accused of all the time, then you don't need the Voting Rights Act. All you need is to stand on your own 2 feet. Every American should be entitled to do that. They should be able to vote. They should be able to vote liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, or even communist, as we're seeing going on in New York right now. But there should not be disproportionate weight on given a minority, I don't believe, in 2025. And I think that by the midterm elections, if the Voting Rights Act is struck down, I think you'll see states redistricting. Florida will try and get rid of the 17% Republicans that they have in Congress, and other states will try and get rid of Democrats.
Just for the record, I agree with you, and I hope that is what happens, because on the one hand, yes, racism is a terrible thing, discrimination is a terrible
Yeah,
thing,
for
but
sure. No
we've,
one's
we've
arguing
ended up
against
kind
that.
of this system with affirmative action, all the rest of this, where you have a sort of weird, perverse, reverse racism going on,
Absolutely.
and that needs to end also.
I'm so type A. I'd like everything right now. I'd like these decisions to be made faster, but that's just not the nature of life, really, nor certainly in terms of our government. But it does seem to be happening. The shift has happened much faster than I thought. I mean, can you believe we're sitting here in October and Trump's only been president for now 9 full months, and DEI is literally gone. It is no longer part of our vernacular except in the history books.
Yeah, and a few university campuses. Yeah, I mean the changes are stunning, and if he lives out the 4 years of his second term, and I don't mean he's going to get assassinated, but he's not a young man either, So I mean, assuming he finishes his second term in office, yeah, we could see some remarkable changes. Another thing I mentioned, the other great tectonic Supreme Court ruling that's coming up is the one on Humphrey's executor. I don't know if you've been following that one as well, but that's a 90-year-old precedent, and that's the ruling that way back in 1935 that effectively laid the foundation for what we now call, the fourth branch of government, the regulatory state. It said it was a decision that said, in effect, no, the president doesn't necessarily have the power to dismiss or fire people within the
Yes.
executive branch in certain offices, and that created the precedent for what we now have. This, and again, that was all set forth as being, the intentions were good. Supposedly, we don't want these agencies to be politicized, to be contaminated by what goes on in Capitol Hill. We want them to be independent. But that also means they're not accountable, as we're discovering now. There's zero accountability to the electorate, and so we've had
Absolutely.
90 years now of this massive cancerous growth of this unelected and unconstitutional fourth branch of government that has judicial power, legislative power, all this sort of thing. Spends money without the say-so of the voters. And if the Supreme Court rules as everyone is expecting them to, and overturns Humphrey's executor, that could be the death knell to these unaccountable agencies as well. That will also be a very significant change.
Well, I made a podcast, and we did a radio segment a couple of weeks ago. It is our best performing segment we've ever done, called "Donald Trump is Deconstructing the Deep State." And I truly do believe that that's what this administration is doing. I think chapter 1 was Russia, 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 where Tulsi Gabbard gave us proof positive that Comey and Obama and Clinton, Clapper and Brennan, they lied. They conspired to conduct a coup against the democratically elected president of the United States. They first tried to defeat him at the polls. That didn't work. So then they tried to oust him. And they did it based on a flagrant, blatant, now known lie. And so I think that's chapter 1. I think the 2020 election may well be chapter 2 of that book. I've served on a team in a lawsuit against the Fulton Board of Elections. I've said it many times. I've seen the evidence. I've cross-examined our forensic accountants. I've cross-examined. I played devil's advocate with them. I've spoken to 4 independent witnesses, each who testified under oath, that they saw 20,000 pristine ballots in the State Farm Tabulating Center, all filled out identically by a printer, not untouched by a human hand, waiting to be counted. So the evidence of a steal in Georgia is overwhelming. I cannot comment with authority on the other swing states, but my suspicions would be that if we looked, we would see very similar things. But this is fact. This is real evidence that exists. I think chapter 3, I hope, will be who took a shot at our president in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th and exposed them. I'd also like in that chapter a subpart to be who killed Charlie Kirk. I don't think we have the answers. And then what else? Oh yeah. Who took down Building 7? I think we have a right to know. So I would just say to Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, live up to your promises, give us transparency, give us truth. And then if the Humphreys Executor Act is struck down, then we could get meaningful reform. I hope that in the process, we can get rid of collective bargaining in our government. I don't think teachers and postal workers should have the benefit of collective bargaining. If you don't like the wage and you don't like the conditions, go find another job. I'm sorry, that's my state of mind.
Well, there are limits to what one man can accomplish, even one man with the will to succeed, Donald Trump, which, part of what's driving Donald Trump is payback. I got to say that after the way they treated him for the better part of 8-10 years, he wants some payback, and I don't blame him one bit. But he's being quite ruthless about it. But these people have it coming to them, and frankly, nothing less than that level of will is going to ever see any of those people do the perp walk. I'll be surprised if any of them actually do jail time or end up being penalized because the judiciary is still very much tilted in favor of the establishment and particularly in the D.C. area. So it's unlikely that Comey will ever see the inside of a jail cell or Brennan or any of the rest of them. But
Comey's in Comey is in Virginia, not much better than D.C., but a fighting chance. The judge has made at least one ruling that I think was favorable to the prosecution. But I really don't like when people come on here and we all agree on everything. The nature of a civilized discourse allows us to really get to the truth. So when I disagree with you or challenge you, it's not because I'm trying to be provocative or be mean, but I do challenge you on a couple of things. I understand that perception that he is being politically vindictive is hard to deny entirely, but there's a difference here, a significant difference. The 90 some odd charges that Trump was indicted on in 4 lawsuits were basically false.
Oh, right.
Take Letitia James. Trump lied on his personal financial statement. Well, my first job was in a bank. I took people's loan applications. We never made a loan decision on someone's financial statement. Instead, what it told us where to look. So if they've got a house and they say that it's worth $1 million, we know to go look at their house. If they say they've got a credit card balance of $5,000, we know to go look. And we find out it's 10, or maybe they made a mistake and it's really only 2. But it's a roadmap on where to look to make the onus is on the banker. In Letitia James's case, there was no victim. There was no complainant. Instead, what there was a candidate who ran for Attorney General of the state of New York on the singular platform that she was going to get Donald Trump.
Oh, no, it's absolutely true. And the thing is, don't mistake the point that I'm making is that Trump is angry, and that's a good thing because the problem,
good motivation
with so many people on our side is that we want to be nice guys, and even Trump. That was one of his big mistakes when his first term in office. Remember when he was on the hustings, what did he say? I'm going to put Hillary Clinton in jail for what she did. And then once he became president, well, let's conciliate here. Let's be not,
That's right.
now that I've won. So, well, that turned out to be a big mistake because, of course,
Mm.
Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and company had no intention of conciliating. The Obamas set up shop in D.C. and began directing operations against Trump, and we know what the result is. So this time around, Trump is angry, and in my opinion, is justifiably angry. He's saying, okay, if that's how we're going to do things, here's what we're going to do. We're no more Mr. Nice Guy. We're not going to gloze over any of this stuff anymore in the name of can't we all just get along? You guys obviously don't want to just get along, so we're going to bring the full brunt of the law down on you. I don't see a
Yeah.
problem with that. And I think paradoxically, I mean that's the level of resolve that's going to be needed to affect real change. And I would add, I
100%.
mean, you mentioned the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, I think that's going to be remembered as an event that helped us, kind of the rank and file people. I mean, I know when I watched that whole thing, I just felt this slow burn inside of me and thought, oh my goodness, And so not that people on our side are not saying, okay, we're going to start going out and shooting them. That's not it. They're just
No,
saying,
that's
okay,
not the
we're
answer.
not going to let them push us around anymore. We're not going,
That's
we're
exactly
not going to
right.
pretend to be nice and kumbaya and all this sort of thing. We're at the point now where we have to stand resolutely on principle and put up with the brickbats and respond in kind. If they insult and lie, say, point it out and say this is, and nothing less than that will suffice, because this kind of deep state has been entrenched for so long, and the lies have become so pervasive that nothing less than that degree of pushback is going to work.
That is the point. It's the lies. And, I'm not happy that, and we just had an interview with a great guy that has produced a movie on the Iraq War. His name is Michael Pack. I think it'll probably be on either next week or the week after in commencement of Veterans Day. But the Iraq War was perpetrated on a lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And I think that Bush and Cheney and Colin Powell knew it. And if they didn't know it, then it was the fault of the CIA that may have given them disinformation in order to get us into that skirmish. I mean, it seems to me like everything, and I know this sounds crazy, and I'm a conspiratorialist. I'm just taking the hand that I've been dealt and the facts that I've looked at. Everything that's bad that's happened in this country seems to track straight back to the CIA and the intelligence community of the United States. And we have given them a pass for so long, starting with the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that they think that they can act with impunity. I think that that day is over. And I think that we're going to see an atonement. So when you say that you don't think that anybody's going to have to serve in jail, I
Hope I'm
understand why
wrong.
you would conclude that, because they never have. They never do. But Comey is so disliked, and he has been so demonic, and he has been so belligerent and vile in the way that he has gone after the 45th and 47th president of the United States. I think he'll be the first to go. And I think John Brennan has legitimately committed treason against this country. He was the station chief in Saudi Arabia with the CIA, and he signed the visas for, I think, 70 or 80% of the terrorists that took down the World Trade Center. At least so we're told they did. I'm not even convinced of that anymore. Somebody said, well, jets really didn't hit the World Trade Center. I don't buy that. I saw it on national TV in real time, but I'm not sure that the jets caused the buildings to topple. I am open to receiving information on that, only because I've seen Building 7 that collapsed 6 hours later, 7 hours later, and not a single architect or engineer that's looked at it believes that it was from debris that came from the Twin Towers, which is what we've been told. It was a controlled demolition, and God only knows what was inside of that building and what somebody was trying to hide. Well, I'm sorry, Steve, you've just fired me up, and I should have had another cup of coffee so I could really get going. But I appreciate your indulgence, and I really appreciate your coming on. And I thank you for your time and your insights today.
Well, thanks, John. It's been a great discussion.
Well, you're the third person I think that we've had on from the John Birch Society, and I began my last interview with who was it? Anthony, was it the general counsel? I think Joe Wolverton, just a
Oh yes,
really
Joel. Yeah.
great guy. And I said, I mean, I was a little reluctant to have representatives from the John Birch Society on because the organization has somewhat of a tainted image that was created historically. But that's kind of like punishing the children for the sins of the father, in my view. Today, I think it's a much different organization, and your mission statement is to um, provide nonpartisan civics and education. What's the matter with that? I love it. Thank you
Yep.
for coming on, Steve, and I
Thanks.
hope I haven't been too severe on you.
No, I appreciate it. I as an academic myself, I'm used to give and take, and I think that's very important.
Well, I think we violently agree on 90% of what we've talked about, but how we get there may be slightly different. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your weekend. You're welcome back anytime.
Likewise. Thanks. Take care.